Good afternoon. I know it's kind of me between you guys and lunch, so I will try and keep this interesting. We shouldn't be here yet. So what we're going to talk a little bit about for the next 15, 20 minutes is kind of the next 5, 10, 15 years of VR and AR, right? I think Jason did a really good job in terms of kind of giving a scope of where things are right today. But what I'd like to talk more about is where we're going to be going and hopefully the impact that this is going to make in all our lives. So if you look at all the movies out there about VR and AR and the future, it's usually dystopian, right? It's about computers taking over the world, robots, making us slaves, blah, blah, blah. Why is everybody always taking such a negative view of the future? I think we need to take the opposite stance, right? The reason that most people fear the future is because they don't know it. They don't understand the technology. And I think this audience, of any audience in the world, is probably some of the most qualified people to understand the future and not be afraid of the technology. This is kind of where we would think, can we turn the sound on? Where we think the future is going to be going with VR and AR.
No longer exist.
A little louder, please.
Where memories can be accessed in an instant.
So it's a technology that lets you travel anywhere in the world instantly.
Can transport you
Right.
anywhere.
It allows people who don't have the physical capability or the finances to do it to travel back in time, to go back to where they grew up. It allows people to work from across the world in different locations but feel like they're in the same place and collaborate on difficult projects and issues.
Spend less time commuting or traveling and more time.
It allows people to have more time because they're going to be more productive.
Instantly access the world's best teachers.
And Jason talked about education. I think education is going to be one of the most disrupted industries by VR. And we'll go through a little bit in the next few slides why that is.
Time will become more abundant, so you can spend it the way you want.
And of course, entertainment is something that most people talk about when they talk about VR. But it's not just entertainment. It's not just about play. It's really learning through play, right? And all the apps that you're seeing right now are all existing apps that are available today on our platform. Right? Even though we're talking about the future is actually, a lot of it's already here, and a lot of people don't know it yet. So hopefully, you guys will be out there helping spread the message and letting more people understand what's possible with this technology. So most, movies are dystopian. We think it needs to be much more positive. The mission for Vive as a company is unleashing human imagination from the limitations of reality. Right? It's a mouthful, but we're doing it not just by talking. We're actually setting up operations and business units to do it. We have HTC Vive, which is the hardware business, the technology business, Viveport, which is our content distribution platform to allow content providers to make money, allow users to get access to content, Vive Studios, which is going to make the top quality content in VR, and financing a lot of independent studios to make high quality content. And then ViveX, which was mentioned earlier, which is our accelerator with $100 million in financing for startups around the world. So I guess in a little bit of differences from a lot of people, I want to make this statement, and it sounds a little bit maybe counterintuitive, but all reality is virtual. Everybody's reality, including the reality we're in right now, is actually virtual, right? We all get millions of pieces of data going into our brains every single second, but we all interpret differently. We all hear different things, we all focus on different things, and we all understand it differently. So in addition to just your brain having a personalized and individual reality, in fact, if there was a dog here or a cat here, their reality from us is also very different because their senses are different, right? So, but in addition to just the biological differences, I think most people will ask me, what's the difference between AR and VR and which one's more important, blah, blah, blah. So I want to point this out. So virtual reality is actually unlimited in terms of the number of worlds it can encompass. It can allow you to go back in any time in history or go into the future. It can allow you to go to any location you want at any point in time, right? You can go to another planet, you can go to the bottom of the ocean. It can allow you to be any size. That could be the size of an atom or the size of a galaxy, right? Augmented reality is more about now. It's about where are you now, at the current time, at the current place, being the size that you are today, right? Now, the two actually are not separate. They're actually overlapping. In fact, today there are devices, like our device, which already has a camera to bring the current world into the virtual space. In fact, the future devices of tomorrow will be a single unified device that allows you to play VR and AR content on a single device, right? So there's no need to separate the two. They're actually going to be one medium, one technology, and it's going to be an immersive virtual world that you're in. So going forward, I'll use the word VR, but when I say the word VR, I mean VR/AR, okay? So currently there's three different types of VR technology. There's the PC-powered, the high-end VR, which is represented by what we provide today, the HTC Vive, and it's won every single award in the market since it was announced last year. Standalone VR, which is a all-in-one VR system that was announced 2 weeks ago with Google, which HTC is also making. And it's coming out later this year and will set a brand new standard for what mobile VR should feel like. And then there's, essentially cardboard VR or phone-powered, mobile-powered VR that's been around for a few years, like the cardboard or Samsung or prior Daydream devices, right? Now, each of them have their different advantages, but they give you a range of pricing that you can access virtual reality. And yesterday, there was a big announcement that just came out from Apple, which is the first and only device that is currently being supported by Apple in the VR space is the HTC Vive. In fact, this is the first time ever in an Apple announcement event that any third party's devices were brought on stage and demoed. So that's actually saying a lot. And in fact, I think Apple doing that also signifies something, because usually Apple is a latecomer in terms of technology. People think they're innovators, but actually they're latecomers. But when they do it big, right? So in fact, I just read an article this morning that said Tim Sweeney, the CEO for Unreal, said this is a signal that VR is going to go into the mass market because now Apple has actually agreed that that's something they want to get into, right? But this is something that we've been doing for the last several years, right? And we created an ecosystem around it. If you can see, we're actually the first company to create wireless VR, putting a device on top of our device and allowing it to be untethered from the PC, but still offer high-quality connections. We released the tracker device, allowing any physical device, whether it's a ping-pong paddle or a gun, to be brought into the VR virtual world. And then there's haptic systems out there that are adding a lot more things than just audio and visual into the experience. In fact, this is an interesting video that shows the application of the tracker system, where by putting it onto your feet, you now bring full body tracking into VR. And you get experiences like this where somebody is not just moving their hands and their head, they're actually moving around, and every single part of their body is fully being tracked and allows you to interact with the content. This is what full immersive VR should feel like. And now, in addition to just physical location tracking or movement tracking, now you're getting into multi-sensory VR or input-output devices. So we just recently invested in a company that puts haptic systems around into your sleeve to add and enhance your haptic movements or haptic feel. We invested in a company that does temperature sensing that actually can heat up or cool down to add another level of reality to your experience. There are companies out there that are making smell sensors. So remember people talk about smell-o-vision? Well, now you can actually add smell to VR. And then eye tracking is something that we announced just about 3 weeks ago with a company in Beijing that plugs right into our existing VR system and allows you to sense your eyes and be able to pass it to a social user somewhere else. In fact, 3 out of these 4 companies are invested by our ViveX investment accelerator. Now, the next thing that's going to come, I think, very soon is brain-computer interfaces, BCI. adding things like EEG, EKG, EMG, etc., into the input-output system to allow it not just to accept information from your brain, but also maybe, in fact, to input information into your brain, to allow the most direct way of interacting with humans. Right? Remember the Matrix movie where you're essentially jacked in? This is kind of the level right before that, right? But it's coming. And then this is actually a picture of an EEG signal around a user while they're playing in VR. And you can see how active they are, essentially feeling like they are at this place. So VR is actually the most direct path to your brain today, right? Because it takes into so many of your senses. It can allow you to have full brain learning. Current education system forces people to look at a board or listen to a teacher and try to take conceptual concepts and put it into their own brain, right, and interpret it. VR allows anybody to have full brain learning so that whatever sense you are, whether you're an audio learner or a visual learner or a tactile learner, you can still learn and become more educated. In fact, our study are showing that by implementing VR-based education, you can turn C students into A students. So Kevin's going to talk to you a little bit later about entertainment. But the first movie that ever came out was a movie about trains. That's why I put this background in there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about screen evolution over the next few years. Now, in 1895, the first movie screen was invented, right? And then over the last 100 years, we've had more and more screens being added to our lives, whether it's the TV or the computer or the phone or the tablet. And you keep adding more and more screens. But what's going to happen for the next 20, 30, 40 years is actually going to be the opposite. We're going to go down in screens. We're going to go from having these 6 or 7 screens that are part of our daily lives into having no screens. Right? That's really the long-term future. So VR, AR, it's going to be the last screen. Right? It is not going to be the 6th or 7th or 8th screen that we have in our lives, because there's no reason for any other screen to exist when you have a screen that exists right in front of your eyes, right? And you have a feel and a touch and the sense of heat and wind and all these other things that you have in the real world. So I think over the last couple of days, you're going to see a lot of technologies being mentioned, from robotics to blockchains to biotech to aging, climate, privacy, security, etc. But there's 3 things I think that's going to come together to make the VR and AR the future, right? And it's high connectivity, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. I think Jason mentioned a little bit of this earlier. But these 3 things together, are going to create what we see as kind of the next wave of VR, AR.
At HTC, we seek the fertile ground at the intersection of these technical advances and our ever-evolving human needs and desires. We imagine a future in which digital experiences transcend the boundaries of screens to inhabit the physical environment of our everyday lives.
So a lot of this thing you can see is a combination of virtual reality and augmented reality in our daily lives, and it feels very natural, and it should be natural. Right? Proper technology shouldn't be something that hides you away from the people around you. It should be something that enhances your experiences with the people around you. And it should teach you in new ways. It should let you work in new ways. It should let you live in new ways that are easier and more efficient.
Are within reach. And where consumers become creators.
And this should also make us healthier, right? It's not a technology where you sit down and you never get up again. It should be a technology that pushes you to go outside and actually enjoy life in a bigger and better way. So we think AR, VR, AI, BCI, and 5G, when they come together over the next 5 years, maybe 10 years, this is going to create the next VR. Right? We call it Vive reality, but it's still VR. So in this new VR-first world, right? People used to talk about, mobile-first or mobile natives, right? I think that the future is going to be the VR-first future. And it is a future where when we wake up, we feel naked when we don't put on our augmented or virtual device. We feel blind when we take it off at night. We feel less intelligent when we don't have it on. right? It's going to be something that we spend most of our day in today at that time. And it will be the primary interface device that we interface with all of the people around us. It will be indispensable. Right? That is the technology that is going to be part of your daily life. So instead of thinking it as one piece of technology that is going to be one of many interfaces, one of many devices, it will be the primary device you will interact with. It's just a matter of time. Right? And I think instead of people talking about Generation Z, etc., this is the next generation, the generation of people who are born after 2010, I think we should call them Generation V. These are the people who won't know anything else but virtual reality in terms of they won't see it as something new and special. It will be part of their daily lives, just like the kids today see a phone as part of their daily lives. Right? Kids like that, they're going to spend a lot of time at school, at work, at home, in devices, hopefully not as big as this in a few years, but this is the technology that they will interact and interface with more than anything else. There's a movie coming out next year called Ready Player One, directed by Steven Spielberg. It's based on a book that came out about 7-8 years ago by Ernest Cline. And HTC just did a deal with them to produce all the content, all the VR content for this movie. And I think this movie is actually about what the future life will be in this VR first world. Right? And it was written in quite a few years ago, but after reading it, I really felt like it gave a very accurate and plausible world of how the world's going to look like. And when this movie comes out next year in 2018, March 2018, it will change people's mindset of what immersive media is, of what VR is, right? It is essentially a 2-hour commercial for how VR is going to change our lives, and it will really, really impact mass adoption. So in this world, it's going to be very different. This is actually part of a April Fool's joke that I had my team create called the VR apartment, VR 公寓. But I think some of the concepts in that particular book or movie is very similar to what we want to create, and particularly actually very applicable to a place like Hong Kong, where cost of real estate is enormous. Right? How many graduates from college today can actually afford to buy an apartment? Not very many. But if you can take a very small space, you put on a headset, and boom, you have a penthouse, or you have a giant playground, right? You put on the headset, then you can travel to anywhere in the world. You feel like you've got harbor view or peak view, right? How much does that feel like and cost, even though it doesn't have to cost much? In fact, that particular room that this person's living in may not even have windows, but it's going to feel like it has panoramic windows. You could play sports in this particular VR apartment, just like you saw earlier. Once you have full body tracking, you can actually be very active and very healthy, and do it not just by yourself, but with anybody around the world. Right? We earlier heard about VR dating, but here's an example. I mean, you could wake up in the morning, put on your headset, and have breakfast with anybody in the world. So whether you're working, learning, living, playing, this technology is going to be impacting your life. In this VR first world, resources are going to be unlimited, right? Because everything is virtual. We spend all our lives and all our time kind of hoarding or creating, amassing materials, amassing money. Why is that important anymore when VR is your most important world? Distance becomes irrelevant, right? I spend 70% of my time flying around the world or commuting to my office or going to conferences and speaking. If I don't have to do that anymore, I could have a lot more time on my hands. I could have a lot more time to spend with people that with my family, with my loved ones, and be more productive while actually spending less time in the office. You're going to have a lot less conflicts, right? The reason people have wars is because they want something that somebody else has. But if everybody has anything you want, why do you need to have conflicts anymore? And money is going to be less valuable, right? I think that the money of today is to buy physical goods. But do you really need to buy as many physical goods when you all have a VR apartment? So intellect, wisdom, creativity, that's going to be the currency of the future, because that's what people will value in a virtual first or VR first society. And it's going to have long-term impact, right? Impact in terms of children being more educated, being smarter earlier, right? Not only are they getting better grades, they're actually progressing and being able to understand difficult concepts earlier in time because they don't have to have this conceptual understanding of all the prior education. Workers can be more efficient. If they're more efficient, then they can spend more time thinking about creatively about things that haven't been solved yet versus doing the mundane things that everybody talks about, right? People recently have been a big fear about robots taking over our jobs and AI taking over our jobs. But you know what? It may be okay to let them take over some of those jobs if we're spending more of our time being creative versus more time pushing paper or email across the web or pushing pieces of hardware on an assembly line. People can choose to live where they want and work where they want. You don't actually have to live and work in the same city anymore. If I can put on a headset and speak to you just like I was here, do I need to actually get on a plane anymore, right? If I could work with a coworker as if I was across the table from him, do I need to make that hour-and-a-half commute every morning I do in Beijing? And people will be happier, and they will be healthier, because what makes people happy, and there's been a lot of study on this, there's two things, right? One thing is having free time. Having free time to do the things that you want, right? And then two is actually being able to have the experiences that you desire, right? It's not about hoarding goods. Any happiness you get from a physical object disappears within a few months. But if you're able to have any experience that anybody else can have, if you're able to have that time to do it, you will be happier. And hopefully you'll be healthier, right? Because we'll have more time to go out and exercise. And lastly, I think what's most important is that as we age, as we have a bigger population, as the resources of the world is being reduced, right? As the climate changes, even though some of our politicians don't want to admit it, we need to think about how we reduce that footprint that we have on the world. And having a VR first type of a world, we can actually do that because we won't need as much fuel to drive our cars around. We won't need as many office buildings. We won't need to fly as much. We won't need to even maybe go out to the supermarket as much because a lot of the things that you'll eat may actually not necessarily be the most fresh food, but it's actually the most efficient when long-term stored food. Right? So there's a lot of things we can do as a society, as humans, that will allow this particular planet that we're on to last longer. And having and properly utilizing this technology will help us do that. So ViveX is actually our accelerator to help make some of that happen. We've already invested in 60+ companies over the last 9 months that is helping to bring in the best content, the technology, the underlying interfaces, etc., to make VR and AR a bigger part of our lives. And we are actually accepting applications now for the next batch. So if you guys or any of the people you know are interested in joining this accelerator, go to vivex.co. And I also manage something called the VR VCA. It's the Virtual Reality Venture Capital Alliance. And it is 47 VCs from around the world, which accounts for $18 billion of investable capital, specifically for VR and AR. So if you have any companies or friends that you know who are raising money, who wants to use this technology and can make an impact and who need the funding, let me know and we can help. So let's go and build a brighter future, right? Let's not go make the future that's in the Matrix or the Terminator. Let's go make a future where all the things that we just talked about can be real. So thanks a lot, and that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Alvin. You say let's not build the Matrix, but I did feel like quite a compelling pitch to plug into the Matrix.
So you want to go to the Matrix?
I'm not sure. I don't think that
so
movie
ended
too well.
the blue pill or the red pill?
We should also point out that Ready Player One is kind of a dystopian
Well,
future
Ready Player
vision?
One is a dystopian in some ways, but they made some changes in the story. I can't talk about it.
Oh, really?
It's actually a little bit better. But I think the key for Ready Player One is it's not necessarily every single piece of that is going to happen, but I think there are lessons we can learn from it, whether it's about how you do schooling in the future, about how you work in the future, how you commute, how you do payments, etc. All these things, I think there's a lot of things we can learn and utilize, and then bring into our real world today so that it doesn't become the dystopian futures that all these authors write about. Because dystopian futures are more fun to read because nobody wants to say everybody's happy and everybody's relaxed and everybody's retired. It's not a very good book.
Right, right. Well, raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, we've got one question here. I thought we might.
Amazing technology.
Wait, we're going to get a microphone for you. Hold on.
Yeah, this is all incredible, amazing technologies and incredible opportunities for the future. Perhaps in the future we can clone a human with a goat. Doesn't mean it's a good idea. So I'm just worried about the downside to some of these technologies, apart from all the great benefits that you've very eloquently elucidated. We talk about going to having a smaller space to live in. I mean, can we go as small as a coffin? If we have these pressure suits and virtual reality headsets, we might be able to just live there like in some of these dystopian science fiction movies I think we've probably all seen. So I'm an educationalist. I work in tertiary education, and although I see incredible educational opportunities in these technologies, I also see opportunities for things to go the other way, people to be dumbed down because all the decisions are being made by the technology and are driving us and controlling us rather than us controlling it. So that's just a concern that some people may be having, and I'm just wondering what you think about that.
I think whenever new technology comes out, there's always a fear, right? When the typewriter came out, people thought, oh, nobody's going to know how to handwrite anymore, which actually kind of happened. but people didn't forget how to use language, right? We maybe just use it in a different way. Right. When TVs came out, people were like, "Oh, is the movie business dead?" There's always going to be a fear, but this doesn't mean that doesn't mean it's bad for society. Right. It's about how do we use this technology to really leverage the positive points. And every technology is going to have people who use it to extreme. Right. And it's going to happen. And we can't stop that small percentage of people from doing that. But if we properly put in the safeguards and we educate our children and their children to properly use any technology, it's going to do more good than harm. So I can't say more than that, but I think at the end of the day, advances in technology is what brought us to where we are today. If we said, hey, let's just stay in the Stone Age and use stones and picks as our technology because we're afraid that fire is bad for us, where would we be?
But
I'm not a Luddite. I'm just saying we need to be careful about ethical and other issues we all need to be aware of.
especially if it's going to be if education is going to be the first kind of or big application, right? You want to tread sort of carefully.
Yeah, education is something I actually care a lot about. In fact, 25 years ago, my senior thesis paper was how will education be disrupted by VR? And to come back 25 years later and have a chance to use this technology and apply in this industry. And we're actually working with a lot of schools, including MIT. In fact, I was just at MIT about a month and a half ago talking to their open learning program and talking to the media lab and talking to them about how to sponsor projects at MIT to help optimize learning using VR. So education is going to be disrupted. It will be better. It will allow kids to learn faster, and it will make the society smarter than ever before. And it will allow people to solve problems that's never been solved before. I think that's really the interesting thing about this technology.
Okay, well, lots of food for thought there. Thank you so much, Alvin.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.